Okay, so today is April 24, 2016, and we are still technically in the first day of the Feast of Unleavened Bread. So let us pray, and then we'll get into our study. Heavenly Family, Todah, thank you so very much. You have blessed us abundantly already this feast. Thank you so much for giving us the experience of having our first Passover vigil and staying up, studying together, discussing principles of truth and investigation and righteousness. Please help us to understand these principles better yet today.
Mm-hmm.
And guide us in our meeting, and bless those who are traveling with safety, and just guide us, Heavenly Family, each of us in our various locations and circumstances, to right now at this present time do exactly what you want us to do and be exactly who you want us to be. Todah, Elohim, thank you so much. We ask these things v'shem Samach, in the name of Branch.
Amen.
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 Okay, so we have many different things that, a number of different aspects and principles that we were discussing last night, and there's, sorry, just a bird going by again.
I want to know what kind of bird that is.
Yeah.
Anyway.
There's always so much for us in terms of principle. And, because of the huge variety of subjects within the message and just the breadth of the message itself, it's easy for us to go from one thing to another thing, and to another thing and another thing. And sometimes that has its place, but often it's most helpful for us to kind of stick to a subject and to go through it. And, yes, there can be place for related questions and so on. But I want to encourage everyone as we are going through the subject to, for us to try and stay focused and really engage our mind to understand what we are investigating. And one of the things that I'll mention in order to help keep us focused on a subject is, when there's a question that we ask, whether I'm asking it or someone else, sometimes people ask questions just, hey, what is the feedback from everyone on this? It's important for us to make an effort to keep with those questions that are asked. And I don't mean that we can't bring the conversation to another area of the same subject. All of us are part of the discussion and have a role to play in bringing it from one point to another. It's just that sometimes people have a tendency, when there's a question that's asked, to just bring in something either on a totally different subject or to maybe say something that's generally related to the subject but not actually an answer to the question. And so that kind of, isn't the best that we can do. We can focus better and get a lot more accomplished and gain a higher understanding if we focus on what we have before us and really seek intently for us to kind of track with each other through the conversation. So I just want to encourage everyone in that.
It kind of appears at times from various people, it's not any one person necessarily, so that maybe they don't know the answer to the question. And so since they don't know the answer to the question, they have something on their mind that they want to say, because there's a pause and an opportunity for someone to speak, real noticeably opportunity for someone to speak, then they just use it as an opportunity to say what they want to say, rather than, there was a question asked, and if I don't know the answer to the question and no one else knows the answer to the question, it's not, oh, well, let's ignore the question and then talk about something else. We should be like, okay, well, how do we find the answer to the question?
Amen, absolutely. Yeah, so these are just principles to keep in mind for the sake of getting the most out of our discussions. So anyways, as we've discussed before, we have a lot to go through in the community rule. I'll do a real brief summary again of what the community rule is, why we're investigating it, where we're at within the community rule.
Sorry, I actually am wondering how you would feel about us asking for feedback from people about last night's meeting. You know, there was a little bit of discussion prior to the recording started, and it was good stuff. People talking about object lessons from the night and various things. And do you think that would be fruitful?
Sure, yeah. Did anyone have anything that they wanted to say in regard to last night's meeting before we get into the community rule?
I have a comment then.
Sure.
That was an awesome night. It really was. And I was really, really blessed in many different ways. And the very first blessing that I received is that everyone in our area was able to get together for Passover. And I could give a couple of stories as to how that all came about, but we know that it was wisdom who worked it out for everybody to be there at the right time, and it was just really awesome for us. Well, I also have a lesson that I learned, and I didn't learn it last night, but I learned it today. Carol had called me and asked me about whether or not we were supposed to have vinegar, or if we were supposed to remove vinegar from the house. And I said, I don't know. I don't know anything about that. I thought it was just leavening. What does vinegar have to do with leavening? So we got on the website and checked it out, and sure enough, not supposed to have vinegar. And I'm like, oh, no. I said, I have hidden sin. I said, because I know it's in my house. And I thought I had everything out, but come to find out, there were things still in my house, in my life. And I was like, wow, Lord, you're just trying to show me more of things that are in my own life. And so it was kind of a little wake-up call for me again today to take a look at some other areas of my life that maybe I hadn't been looking at. So that was really good. So I did want to ask, though, about vinegar. What does vinegar have to do with leavening?
That's an excellent question. But first, that's an excellent testimony and everything, and I just love how our Heavenly Family uses circumstances in order to bring people to do further searching and self-examination. On the point of vinegar, I assume that was from a Ben Roden study that you found out on the website, correct?
Yes,
Okay, so I really don't know what vinegar might have to do with leaven. However, I do remember probably 4 or 5 Passovers ago now, not specifically the question of vinegar that I remember, but just the large list of things that Ben Roden gave as things that are potentially inclusive of leaven or potentially leavening agents. And I remember us talking about it with Doug, and I think he basically pointed out that a number of the things on the list are not actually leaven or leavening or anything like that. And perhaps Ben Roden got that from another traditional source that counts all those things as leaven. And it would be interesting to check. In Orthodox Judaism, do they count all of those things as leaven? I don't know. Or let's just say with vinegar, is there actually something in it that makes it a leavening agent? And I don't know of anything that does.
I would imagine that people might think that vinegar itself is leavened because it is fermented, and some people associate like sauerkraut, fermented or cultured vegetables as leavened. And that's something that that came to my mind whenever you said it. That's what I was wondering, if the reason vinegar was considered something that should be removed is because it was thought of as something that is leavened, but not something that is a leavening agent.
I have something to add on that.
Sure.
But I can wait if you had something to say first.
No, you go ahead.
Well, it's just a small little comment, but in a recipe that calls for sour milk or even buttermilk sometimes, one of the substitutions a cook could do is add vinegar to the milk, and that sours the milk. That's just something, throw out there. Maybe that would put some meaning into it, but that's the only thing I can think of either that vinegar would do in foods and stuff. But yeah, if you add just a little bit of vinegar to like 3/4 of a cup of milk, you can use it in a recipe that calls for sour milk. That's all.
Okay.
So then what would sour milk have to do with leavening then? I mean, what I don't understand, because one of the items was sour cream. And I'm like, what does sour cream have to do with leavening?
Well, again, that would be the perception of it having been leavened because it's cultured. And go ahead, hon.
Yeah, so I'm just thinking that in talking about Leviticus chapter 1 before, and talking about and actually chapter 2, talking about the idea of unleavened grain offerings. So that's Leviticus chapter 2. And we talk about, well, what is it, what is the idea of leaven? What is it? And, I remember, I think Teresa was asking, well, did they even have baker's yeast and different things like that, like people have today? And well, probably not. So how did they actually leaven their bread? And it's a good question. And perhaps anciently, what they did was actually fermentation. And so if that is the case, and I'll say that anciently, so far as I'm aware, that is at least one method of doing it. If that is the case, then fermentation itself would be viewed as leaven or leavening. And so anything which is fermented or cultured or whatever would in that case be considered leaven.
Yeah, I have a comment. If you look up leaven in the dictionary, it says a substance, typically yeast, that is added to dough to make it ferment and rise. But then it also talks about other things that can be fermented as well. So, yeah, I mean, according to this definition and some others, it's the issue of fermenting, and that's what makes it rise. So, yeah, vinegar would be fermented. Milk, when it's soured, that's fermented. And those other things that are on that list would be going along with this the broader definition of leaven and anything that's fermented rather than just a grain. Right?
Well, that's helpful. Thank you.
Trent, I missed a couple of sentences. I was doing something for the dogs, and I may have missed this, but I've been waiting to add this. Did someone ever mention sourdough bread? Because maybe that's how they make the original starter for that is, other things, but including vinegar. But I could have missed something that may have already been mentioned.
Yeah, I don't think anyone specifically mentioned sourdough bread, but we talked about making bread rise by means of fermentation.
Which is sourdough bread.
Well, there's a few different ways depending on how you define sourdough bread, because you can use fermentation to make bread rise without having it actually taste sour and without it actually sitting there. And I think it had to do, when we looked into it before, with the when you actually do the fermentation, and I forget it, but basically had to do with the order of when you do something and whether you let your dough sit there for a long time or whether you ferment something ahead of time and then use that to make your dough and then cook with it right away. One of them produces a thicker, heavier, denser bread that is typically called sourdough, which Ellen White spoke heavily against, and then the other one doesn't actually create a sour-tasting bread. It just causes bread to rise. So
I found another definition that says to cause to rise by adding something as baking powder, for example, that produces a gas. So it's the issue, according to this, of a gas being produced. And I know in Ben's list he said, that you can keep beans in your house, but once you cook them, within a few minutes it produces a gas. He didn't say it produces a gas, but it becomes leavened, which, it produces a gas. And so as long as you don't cook them, you can keep them in your house. So this must be the issue that this way of looking at leaven takes in mind.
Interesting, yeah. This is all something we'll have to investigate. I wish I could remember more precisely the things that Doug had to say on this topic. And perhaps we have it recorded somewhere.
I'm sure we do.
Yeah, that's a long list of recordings to go through. So, we'll see. Heavenly Family, guide us into exactly the truth of that and show us what we should do and what exactly should be considered leaven and what shouldn't. Okay, were there any other comments concerning last night or questions or anything like that before we get into the community rule?
I learned that toasters are considered leaven as well.
Yeah, I suppose that that's probably the easiest way.
It's currently on punishment outside the house because we didn't feel like cleaning it out last night.
Right. All right, anything else? I thought I would mention briefly, some of you may have had an opportunity to see this already, but last night I referenced a video that I had filmed, but I had not yet edited the video and posted it on YouTube. And I have done so now. I believe it's called Let Us Not Keep the Feast, dealing with 1 Corinthians chapter 5, verses 7 and 8. So I just wanted to mention that. It's about 14 minutes and 45 seconds or so, and it deals with some of the principles that we spoke of a little bit last night, although in a far more condensed form. So wanted to mention that for everyone, and there will actually be another one coming up soon. I thought you might all like to see them at some point after the meeting. Mm-hmm. All right, well, if there aren't any other comments or questions, let us get back to the community rule. And so again, I'm just going to recap what the community rule is, why we are investigating it. I'm not going to go in a great length of detail on this, but it'll be helpful for us to just briefly recap. So, of course, as most here are familiar with, the community rule is a document that was found in the Dead Sea Scrolls that dates back into the 2nd century BC, which is 100 something. The 2nd century is actually from about the year 200 BC to 100 BC. That's the 2nd century. Now, why are we even investigating these things? Well, what we've learned is that the idea of a scripture canon, again, that idea is simply having a set list of what is the inspired authoritative writings, in other words, Scripture, and this list cannot be added to nor taken away from. It is fixed and it is final. And there's many, many other aspects to the idea of a canon, how it impacts the reading of the individual texts within it and without it, how it causes people to investigate or rather not investigate, and many, many other aspects. But what we have found is that this idea of a fixed canon of Scripture is not actually a scriptural idea. There's nowhere in Scripture, for instance, that gives such a list. The only place that you can find a canonical list within a Bible is in the table of contents, which, of course, far post-dates the writing of any of the individual compositions that are included within the various Bibles. We've also learned that different communities have different Bibles. And this isn't just a different translation or a different version. It's different collections of books that make up the Bible. So, of course, Samaritans have a very small Bible of only 5 books. Rabbinic Jews have a larger Bible which is basically the same content as the Protestant Old Testament, though in a different order. The vast majority of Christians have an Old Testament which is larger than the Bible of the Jews, but with also a New Testament in addition to that. And then you have Protestants, and they ended up removing a number of the books that were in Christian canons for a long time, and thus ended up with a shorter canon. There's many, many other aspects to this, but the point is, well, how do we know which canon is right, if any are? And, of course, we have learned that the idea itself is not something that heaven has given to us. And, of course, we have the Adventist context of that, too, where Ellen White talks about the hidden books and how those who are wise in the last days should understand them. She talks about the Apocrypha and so on and so forth. We won't go through all of that again since we've gone through it in a number of other studies. But these are things that have started our investigation of other writings which at one point in the past were considered Scripture by ancient Jews or ancient Nazarenes, which is simply the name for the original followers of Christ before anyone was called Christian. So a number of these things were considered Scripture and then later were basically not considered Scripture by those who ended up making up either the majority or just simply the community within which we find ourselves in this Western world. So, of course, the Dead Sea Scrolls are an incredible and significant find from the 1940s and 50s of a library of ancient Jewish writings which span from the 2nd and even 3rd century BCE up until just before the destruction of the temple in 70. So it was really until 68 AD or 68 CE. And these writings have many striking parallels to the New Testament and to the sayings of Jesus and so on, to the point where it is clear that the community which composed, preserved, and wrote down and eventually hid in caves these writings that we now know as the Dead Sea Scrolls, that community was in many ways a forerunner to the community of the early believers in Jesus. And so many, many different parallels, many things in the New Testament which cannot be found anywhere in the Old Testament are found in the Dead Sea Scrolls literature. In particular, what you might call the quote-unquote sectarian literature. In other words, the writings which had their origin with the community that preserved them, rather than simply writings which preceded the community and they held and preserved within them. such as the book of Isaiah, for example. So the community rule is a text which is very central to that community, to that group that preserved the Dead Sea Scrolls. The community rule is somewhat like a fundamental beliefs and constitution and bylaws of the community. To put it in Davidian language, it's somewhat similar to the Leviticus of Davidian Seventh-day Adventists, just from, over 1,000 years before. And in a different context, of course, as a result of that. So the community rule itself, it opens with explaining its purpose and what the basic principles of the community are. And then following that, there is a covenant ceremony which is described, and essentially that ceremony consisted of pronouncements of blessings and curses, and those entering the covenant agreeing to the blessings and curses, saying amen, and they confess their own sins, and they acknowledge the mercy and righteousness of God. And that's basically a nutshell summary of that covenant ceremony. Now, after the covenant ceremony, there's a paragraph, which is the paragraph that we are currently investigating. And the parts that we have discussed somewhat already are the aspects relating to the annual observance of the covenant ceremony, that is, for as long as the dominion of Belial endures. And then we have the entrance of the people, including priests, Levites, and the rest of Israel, coming together, entering, presumably, to have this covenant ceremony. So we'll recap that perhaps a little bit more, and I'll read this paragraph again before we start looking at the next aspect. But I just wanted to ask, are there any questions or comments on the community rule overall, or any particular aspects that we've already discussed before we get into the particulars of this paragraph? All right. Doesn't sound like there are any comments or questions. So bless us again, Heavenly Family, as we read these things. So I'm going to read this paragraph again. It starts at 1QS, which is, again, the first cave at Qumran, and S stands for Serek, because in Hebrew, the rule of the community, or the community rule, is, the way to say that in Hebrew is Serek HaYahad. So this is 1QS, column 2, starting at around line 19 and going to line 25 or 26. Thus shall they do year by year, for as long as the dominion of Belial endures. The priests shall enter first, ranked one after another according to the perfection of their spirit. Then the Levites, and thirdly, all the people one after another in their 1000's, 100's, 50's, and 10's, that every Israelite may know his place in the community of God, according to the everlasting design. No man shall move down from his place, nor move up from his allotted position, for according to the holy design, they shall all of them be in a community of truth and virtuous humility, of loving kindness and good intent one towards the other, and they shall all of them be sons of the everlasting company. All right, so as already mentioned, we've looked at the aspect of from year to year, so the annual observance of the covenant ceremony, and we have found that the evidence suggests that this covenant ceremony was done at Pentecost, the Feast of Pentecost. Then we started to look at this aspect of, okay, we have a procession of different groups of people. First priests, then Levites, then all the people. Again, in their 1000's, 100's, 50's, and 10's. So we've seen, well, this is quite the organized system. And we went through and we read a number of things from Ellen White regarding organization and order within God's church. And so we read Desire of Ages, page 680, paragraph 1, Patriarchs and Prophets, page 374 to 376, and Acts of the Apostles, page 95, paragraph 2, to the end of page 96. And in all of those places, Ellen White emphasizes the importance of order and organization, and she describes how a high state of order not only marked the movements and the structure of the worship and civil life and everything related to ancient Israel, and not only was that same principle at work in the apostolic movement, but that is also the order of heaven. And if we are to work in harmony with heaven, we must have the same state of organization and order. And that only by means of such organization can success attend the work. So there's a lot of importance attached to these ideas. So there are other statements which relate to this whole idea, and we'll look at some more too. Again, relating to organization and order. I have in my notes a reference to the Leviticus of Davidian Seventh-day Adventists, and so I wanted to check that quickly, although it may just be quoting some of the passages from Ellen White that we have already considered. So let's check that out quick. Okay. Okay, here we are.
Hey, Trent.
Yep.
With the perfection of the Spirit, the order of perfection of the Spirit, did we come to a consensus of what it took to actually organize and, like, how do you say, hierarchy, rank, order of perfection of Spirit?
Okay, yeah, excellent. So some of the things that we discussed were that within the community rule itself, as well as through the Thanksgiving hymns, it's evident that the teacher of righteousness, or the master, also called the guardian of the community, was responsible for examining, at least the initial examination of someone seeking to enter the community. And it also describes further examination by means of, and this is something we have to find out for sure, whether it's the community as a whole or a council within the community. But essentially, at least we know that the master or the teacher was involved in that, and there may have been others involved in this examination, and it would be seen according to their knowledge and according to their works. That's how it puts it in the Thanksgiving hymns. According to those things, they would be given their allotted place within the community. So that's kind of the idea of ranking them according to the perfection of their spirit. Their spirit is their will. In Haggai, I believe it is. and perhaps also in Zechariah, it talks about stirring up the will of Zerubbabel and of Joshua, son of Josedek, stirring up their spirit. And some translations actually translate stirring up their will, because in the context it's very clear that that's what it's referring to. And a little bit later in the community rule, we'll get to the section on the two spirits, and we'll see that it's according to the choice that people make, according to their spirit, according to their will. Again, someone's will, their choice, it's the same basic idea. So someone's choice, someone's will, someone's spirit, will determine their level of understanding and will determine their works, because it's by what we choose that we can come to learn more or less, and we can come to behave differently. So that's how they are examined, according to those things, and according to what condition they are in, that will determine where they are placed within the community. And then, of course, there's later examinations that can be done in which the guardian may move someone to a place of higher responsibility within the community. And so, yeah, there's a lot of things like that involved, which, by the way, Ellen White actually refers to the same sort of thing taking place in regard to baptism, not so much in regard to placing them in a certain place within the community, but in regard to examining them according to their knowledge and their works. And then, of course, Victor Hoffe did the same thing in bringing Davidians into the Davidian organization. So does that help to kind of summarize that idea?
Yes, now I remember actually the whole conversation.
Okay, hey, awesome.
Yeah, which also leads to a further thought. I wonder if the teacher of righteousness or the other figure that we were talking about, if they have a way of improving / ascending the perfection of spirit, like, is there a way to, improve yourself? I mean, learning?
Absolutely. And, this is actually one of the things from the very beginning of the community rule. It says, the master shall teach the saints to live according to the book of the community rule. So it's saying the purpose, the reason why the master is to teach the saints to live according to the book of the community rule. It is so that they may seek God with a whole heart and soul, and to do what is good and right before him, as he commanded by the hand of Moses and all his servants the prophets, that they may, etc., 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 that they may, etc., etc. It lists those things. And then also, let's see here. Later, I'm trying to remember exactly where it is here. Might be here, okay. Talks about those who enter the community, how they are to bring everything that they may order their powers according to his ways of perfection, that's God's ways of perfection, and all their possessions according to his righteous counsel, and so on. And we talked about the idea of perfection before, how it's used in the community rule, and we found that the idea of constant advancement is a part of that. So it's showing that joining the community is actually bringing someone into a place where they can advance as much as possible continually. And lastly, I'll mention on that idea, coming closer to the end of the community rule, there are a number of places which give precepts or rules for the master. And it talks about how he is supposed to, let's see here, I'll just read a little bit of it. This is from 1QS, column let's see, it looks like column 9, starting at line 14 or so. It says, he shall separate and weigh the sons of righteousness according to their spirit. He shall hold firmly to the elect of the time according to his will, as he has commanded. He shall judge every man according to his spirit. He shall admit him in accordance with the cleanness of his hands, and advance him in accordance with his understanding. He shall love and hate likewise. And then it goes on, it says, he shall not rebuke the men of the pit, nor dispute with them. He shall conceal the teaching of law from the men of injustice, but shall impart true knowledge and righteous judgment to those who have chosen the way. He shall guide them all in knowledge according to the spirit of each, and according to the rule of the age, and shall thus instruct them in the mysteries of marvelous truth, so that in the midst of the men of the community they may walk perfectly together in all that has been revealed to them. This is the time for the preparation of the way into the wilderness, and he shall teach them to do all that is required at that time, and to separate from all those who have not turned aside from all injustice. So there it's describing a little bit more of the function of the master or the instructor. That's another way to translate the same word, within the community in teaching people the way and teaching people the mysteries of marvelous truth and so on and so forth, that they may walk perfectly, teaching them according to their spirit and so on and so forth. And that's not the only place in the community rule that talks about that too. So as we continue, we'll see more places like that as well. But I thought that is a nice kind of summarizing place of at least some of the function of the master.
Well, that definitely helps fill in the gaps and the blanks where, whomever on whatever path they are, is or resides.
Yeah. Yeah, for sure. So I looked up the passage here from the Leviticus of Davidian Seventh-day Adventists, and yes, it's essentially just quoting the same statements that we already looked at. And the reason, of course, why the Leviticus of DSDA was quoting those statements from Ellen White is in regard to the same principles we're discussing, the importance of order and organization and all of that. So, let's see here. My page that we're looking at from the Dead Sea Scroll book that I have is actually totally separated from my book. So, it's kind of interesting dealing with this. Okay, so another passage that we'll read in connection with this is from the Thanksgiving hymns again. Again, the Thanksgiving hymns are a collection of writings that, perhaps more certainly than any other writings in the Dead Sea Scrolls, originated with the teacher of righteousness. And they are among the most paralleled writings that is in relationship to the New Testament from among the Dead Sea Scrolls. In other words, the community rule and the Thanksgiving hymns find many parallels within the New Testament and other, what you might call New Testament Apocrypha. So again, that's just to say one of the reasons why the Thanksgiving hymns are very important. So we're going to look at 1QHA, column 18, line 27. It says here, you will give to the children of your truth unending joy and everlasting gladness, and according to the measure of their knowledge, so shall they be honored one more than another. And likewise, for the Son of Man, ... you will increase his portion in the knowledge of your truth, and according to the measure of his knowledge, so shall he be honored. So that's using that same language, describing how different people will, in some sense, be in different ranks according to their knowledge, and as we read elsewhere, according to the cleanness of their hands. Now, there are other elements in this section that we're looking at that find parallels throughout the writings which we are already so familiar with. For example, Exodus chapter 18, verse 21, talks about the rulers of thousands, rulers of hundreds, rulers of 50's, and rulers of 10's. And I believe verse 25 does as well. Yes, and also Numbers 31:14, Deuteronomy 1, chapter 1, verse 15, 1 Maccabees chapter 3, verse 55. All of those have this idea of these different ranks and rulers organized in this same way, rulers over different groups, and people being grouped according to these numbers. There are also references in the book of Enoch, the ones that I have on hand, in my recollection, do not refer to the full order of this, that being thousands, hundreds, 50's, and 10's, but it does refer to something that is along those lines. So let us see if I can just pull it up here quick. Okay. So this is 1 Enoch chapter 6, verse 8. It lists 20 individuals who were in charge over 200 individuals, and after listing the 20, it says in 1 Enoch chapter 6, verse 8, these are their chiefs of 10's, or rulers over 10's, and of all the others with them. So there you have, in regard to not only humans, but in regard to angels, you have the idea of rulers over 10's. And then in 1 Enoch chapter 9, verse 7, it says, moreover, Semyaz, or Shemihaza, there's different translations give his name in slightly different ways, but moreover, Semyaz, to whom you have given power to rule over his companions, cooperating, they went in unto the daughters of the people on earth. Okay, so what we find there is that this is, if I'm remembering correctly, it is one of the angels speaking to God and referring to this angel who led other angels astray, and said to God, you gave him power to rule over his companions. So that implies that the chiefs over 10's and the rulership that they had in connection with one another was something that was not of their own planning, but was actually their appointed positions by God. So that's just an interesting testimony from the book of Enoch in regard to this sort of organization in heaven. Of course, Ellen White says that there is such organization in heaven, but it's a little hard to find places in the Protestant canon that state that explicitly or give specific examples that demonstrate that. There certainly may be things, but this is certainly an interesting example from 1 Enoch. Are there any other comments or questions on this aspect of thousands, hundreds, 50's, and 10's?
Well, I'll just make a quick comment that it's, definitely in harmony with aspects that we already know of order. And it's just what you've already brought out, but I thought I would just mention that I see it as well. And it's one of those things that, yet again, I'm not seeing anything so far in this document, the community rule, that is contrary to any truth that we already understand.
Okay, amen. So, yes, it's certainly within heaven's order to have such groupings of individuals, both in heaven and on earth. And even regardless of the community rule, even if we just put the community rule aside, we still have the instruction through Ellen White and through Victor Hodeff in the Leviticus of Davidian Seventh-day Adventists concerning following essentially this exact order that it lays out in the community rule. In that, hey, the example given to us is the divisions of 1000's, 100's, 50's, and 10's for the children of Israel. And then, of course, there's also the idea of priests and Levites, which actually I'll comment on that a little bit more in just a second. But I just wanted to say, in regard to the community rule, it seems to be the case in a number of incidents throughout it, where for some reason the community rule, it's just written in such a way that makes you realize that, yeah, you need to actually follow these things if the community rule is true. It's something that actually is to be done. And so even with things that we have the instruction elsewhere, for some reason, we have not been in the habit of obeying. We have not been in the habit of actually following the instruction and the order prescribed. But the community rule, again, it's written in such a way that paints things so plainly that I think it's kind of evident to anyone reading it that, well, if we're to follow it, it must be followed. And there's kind of no way around it. So I wanted to go back again to the idea of priests and Levites as distinct from Israel, of course as part of Israel, but still distinct from the rest of the people. Now, this, in one sense, it's kind of an obvious thing. You look at how it was all throughout the Old Testament, and you had priests, and you had Levites, and then you had the rest of the people. That's just how it was. But there's something that kind of comes up in relation to this, is the fact that, hey, if this is from our heavenly family, it's something that we need to know how to keep. So just like we paused for a moment to look at the covenant ceremony and when it is to be kept, for the purpose of finding out, not just historically, oh yeah, that's when they kept it, but also if we are to have this covenant ceremony, we need to know when to do it. So it's the same thing with this organization of priests and Levites and groupings of 1000's, 100's, 50's, and 10's. How ought we to go about that? Well, in one sense, the grouping of people into 1000's, 100's, and 50's, and 10's is straightforward enough. But what about the identity of the priests and Levites? Especially given the fact that we know, according to Scripture, quite plainly, that the priesthood has been changed. So it's no longer the Levitical priesthood. So who are parallel to the Levites, let's say, within the priesthood after the order of Melchizedek? Who are parallel to the Levites? Who are parallel to the priests? And what about the congregation? Why is that a separate thing? We've talked before about how, hey, all of us are called into priesthood. we're told in the New Testament that we, and also actually in the Old Testament, that we are to be a nation of priests. We are to be ministers. But here's the thing. As we all know, ancient Israel was to be a nation of priests as well. But within those same laws that say that Israel was to be a nation of priests, we also, as for those who were on late last night, we also see in those same laws that anyone other than the sons of Aaron who would attempt to engage in priesthood would be put to death. So what's the issue there? How could it be that the priesthood is given so exclusively to the sons of Aaron, and yet at the same time the nation be a nation of priests? And then, of course, in the New Testament, you have the nation of priests thing as well. So how does all this relate? Does anyone have any comments or questions in relation to this whole thing?
The nation of the priests that were of the sons of Aaron were to minister in the earthly sanctuary, and the Melchizedek order ministers in the heavenly. So that nation of priests is under the Melchizedek priesthood.
Okay, but how does that correlate to, within the typical service, you had priests, Levites, and everyone else. In one sense, everyone was a nation of priests, right? But there was still a distinction between the majority of Israelites and Levites, let's say. And then even a more narrow circle within the Levites was the sons of Aaron, who were the priests, who had that exclusive right of priesthood. So how does that relate to the antitypical system?
I have a guess.
Okay.
That I guess you could just look at, why the heavenly family selected Aaron, Moses, and why he selected the Levites, and separated them out from the rest of the congregation. And I know that the intention was that they all would be, but that they all weren't, which I don't know if that's a type, just that even though they were all supposed to be doesn't mean that they all are going to be, I don't know. Or that, I know that the Levites were chosen because of their basically kind of very strict observance of the community rule and doing the righteous thing. Again, even first reading through, the selection of the Levites, it seemed like a really harsh thing that they did to their own, brothers and sons and countrymen. But God saw that obviously as righteous, and so maybe those same standards would apply now.
Okay, interesting. Any other comments on that?
Well, one thing we know is that someone becomes a priest when they are born again.
Okay. Now, let me ask you, is everyone supposed to be born again?
Yes.
Is everyone supposed to be a priest?
Yes.
Yeah, I'll say that last one was a trick question. because yes, in one sense, at least in one sense. But then again, why do we have a distinction between priests and Levites and the rest of Israel?
I've been sitting here thinking about it since you've asked the question, and I've been trying to, in order to understand the reality, we've been given pictures or types to illustrate the reality. So I've been trying to understand what the picture is or what the type is. And so you mentioned, you have the nation of Israel, and they were to be a nation of priests. However, you had this lineage of the descendants of Aaron who only could officiate as actual priests in the sanctuary. And then you had these other people who were allowed to be Levites. But the other people outside of that tribe and lineage weren't able to officiate in the sanctuary service at all, which means none of them could be actual priests in the sanctuary, and yet they're called to be a nation of priests. So I have been trying to understand how the nation of Israel could be a nation of priests, even if everyone had been operating in the ideal situation of submission to God. What would that look like? And I still don't know, but I just wanted to kind of talk it out. Maybe maybe in doing so, I would discover something as I'm reasoning it out verbally, or maybe I would trigger a thought in someone else's mind, or whatever. But at the very least, you would know where my head is at and how I'm trying to understand it.
So, are you wanting to do that right now, or are you just in the process of?
Oh, that's all I've got.
Okay, no, that's good. I wanted to mention something in connection with one of the aspects that Mary mentioned of how, it wasn't really originally intended that it would just be the Levites, but it ended up being the Levites, and they were chosen because of their loyalness to God and the covenant and so on. And
yeah, that was a good point.
Yeah. Now, interestingly, though, even if the Levites were never chosen, and we can see that the reason, at least the story as we have it in Exodus, the reason is basically that the rest of Israel had gone astray and they remained faithful. So the privilege of priesthood was taken away from the rest and it was just left for them. But here's the thing, even if they had been obedient, was everyone allowed to be a priest before the Levites were called?
No.
No. Even then, it was just the firstborn males. So it's still just a portion that would actually be allowed to minister in the sanctuary as official sanctuary priests. Yet everyone would still be a nation of priests. And here's another distinction. As a nation, they would be a nation of priests, male and female. But so far as we are currently aware, the Aaronic priesthood itself was composed solely of males. I just mentioned this to say how it's clearly a different thing, So when we're looking at things in relation to antitype, like let's say we have the community rule here, and there's going to be a time, let's just say if the community rule is really from our Heavenly Family and is supposed to be followed, and we're supposed to keep a covenant ceremony, and we're supposed to enter in an orderly fashion as prescribed in the community rule, and it commands that first come the priests, then the Levites, then the people, ordered in their 1000's, 100's, 50's, and 10's. Well, who are the priests? Who are the Levites? We have these specific divisions, and does that relate in some way within the antitypical system? We know it's not talking about Aaronic priests. Well, I'll say in its original context, it was most certainly talking about Aaronic priests and literal Levites. But the community rule itself, as we'll find out closer to the end, is specifically prophetic. intending to give the order of things at the time of the final atonement. So if it's from our Heavenly Family, it's to be followed, and it lays out a system using typical language, but if it's from our Heavenly Family, it is supposed to be carried out in the time of the anti-typical system. So the question is, well, does the anti-typical system correlate to the typical system in there being a distinction between the nation as a whole, Levites, and priests?
Well, another thought that comes to my mind in relation to that is to look to the prototype. And so would we find some of the answer, some or all of the answer to your question in the structure that Jesus had in his ministry, where you have him, say he's fulfilling the role of the instructor or the master, and then he has this core group of disciples who are closest to him that he tells things to that he doesn't tell to other people. There were the 12 that he shared things with that he didn't share with the multitudes. He spoke in parables to the multitudes, and in private with the 12, he would explain the parables more plainly. And then he had Peter, James, and John out of that group of disciples that he shared even more personal or even sacred things with that he didn't share with the rest of the 12. And as I'm thinking of that, and I'm thinking of the Israelite nation, and I'm putting this together with ritual purity, this pattern that seems to be emerging in my mind is you have, in Jesus' ministry, you have him being sinless, of course, very pure, and you have this group, these core groups of people around him, and as you get closer to him, the numbers diminish. There's maybe 3 very close to him, and then you go out a level, and there's the 12, and then you go out another level. It's making me think of the purity zones that you shared with us at like the last new moon or so, with the sanctuary, and how you have these levels of holiness or purity zones where you have the most holy place in the sanctuary where only the high priest was ever allowed to go. And then out one zone from that is the holy place where priests and the high priest could go. And then you have the courtyard where the Levites and the priests and the high priest could go. So more people are expanding. And so that's now where my thoughts have expanded to.
Okay. Well, certainly there is a correlation to some extent with ritual purity and the division of the nation between priests, Levites, and the rest of the people. But then you also have, again, the rulers of 1000's, 100's, 50's, 10's, and just the groups of 1000's, 100's, 50's, and 10's. And those are not necessarily correlating to different ritual purity sections, and I know you understand that. But and then the Levites also yeah, they have a connection to the sanctuary, but they're not allowed to officiate as priests. But so there are relationships to ritual purity zones, but of course that doesn't provide the relationship to the antitypical system, other than, of course, in giving one aspect of the basic form of it, in that, yes, there are different purity zones, and there's different groups of people depending on how pure they are, how fit they are for that zone. You know, there's different groups of people that can be in each respective zone. So there are a number of elements involved with that. You mentioned in the ministry of Christ, different circles of people surrounding him who he told different things to. You know, you have the 3 closest disciples, then you have the 12 apostles, and you have the 70 disciples, and then you have a broader group of disciples around him, and then others beyond. Certainly that has this idea. However, I'm not aware of, is there a relationship between, are the 70 disciples correlating to the priests, and then some out from them correlating to the Levites, and some out from them the rest of Israel, something like that. So those correlations still need to be understood and investigated. Then, for instance, you find things in the New Testament, like Paul referring to himself as a priest in Romans. Well, certainly he was not a priest of the Levitical order, because he wasn't a Levite, he wasn't a son of Aaron. He was a priest of a different order. Of course, after the order of Melchizedek, following his Savior. So how does Paul then relate to that system? He calls himself a priest. Is he a priest in the sense that everyone in Israel is a priest, or was he a priest in a more specific sense? Was he a priest like the sons of Aaron were priests within the typical system? And is there a difference between those things in the antitypical system? So again, I'm not saying that we're going to come to the final answer of those things tonight, whether, either for how it played out in the Nazarene movement of the first century, or how it is to play out today. But it's something that we need to be aware of, and to consider, okay, well, is everyone in the antitypical system supposed to be a priest in the sense of a son of Aaron was in the typical system? Or is it more specifically correlating to the typical system, where everyone is supposed to be a priest in the general sense that all Israel was, but that there are also divisions within that priestly nation, and only one of those divisions would be people who would actually be considered sanctuary priests?
Well, it seems like the second option is more likely.
Well, it's certainly more according to the type, right?
Mm-hmm.
And where there is a type, there is an antitype. And where there is no type, there is no truth. So do we have a type for the first option? Not really, but we do have a type for the second option, of there being a more specific correlation, and in the antitypical system having various groups of people who compose the community. Now, one of the other aspects here to consider is, hey, within the Nazarene movement, you had the organization of the whole movement taking on a certain form. It was very, very much a practical form, but there were different people in different groups of people. There were, overseers, there were elders, there were just what you'd call lay people, there were full-time ministers, you had all those different questions, or all those different groups. And so the question is, do those things correlate in some way to the divisions that we are looking at here within the typical system? So are there any other comments or questions on these aspects?
Me and Ed had a couple more quick comments, and a lot of these comments are just coming to our mind. Like Teresa, she did kind of stir something in our minds where Ed was making a chart of the 10's, the 50's, the 100's, and the 1000's, which is 4 groups. And then we were thinking of the harvest, that there's first the wave sheep, and then the 144,000, the 200 million, and then the great multitude, which kind of numerically typically sort of lines up with that. And, and just the other thing that I was just thinking just earlier is that, if everybody's righteous in the community, of course they would be, and that everyone is content and happy with their position, that all positions are needed. I mean, if you run a business, which we've all worked in businesses, and we know that, or even in the church, the person that's, cleaning the church is hugely important. It's just got a very honorable job. I mean, we look at it as dishonorable, but it's not, at all. It's a super high honor of the sons of Korah, being the door holders and whatnot, or the gatekeepers, and what an honor that was, and how they resented that position that they had, and what a shame that really was. But that, if everyone's content, not everyone really wants to be, everyone just has a different personality, and some people just love to work and, love to stay more in the background. Some people, and not if it's a pride thing, at all, but some people just have different talents and different gifts. And I know the community rule talks about ranking, based on their works and their fitness, for the job, of course. But I don't know, these thoughts are just in my head and they're very disorganized. I apologize for that, but that's it.
No, that's excellent. I mean, we should be investigating things along these lines, and yeah, it's good. Were there any other comments?
I was just along the lines of business or a hierarchy, or you have brackets, and there are some people that are on the same tier. They're equal to each other, such as a president and then a vice president, or let's call him a senior vice president, and then you have junior vice presidents. So you have junior vice, say you have junior vice presidents, they're all on the same tier of that level. So it's kind of everything as far in the kingdom. The Dead Sea Scrolls here, the community rule brings on some terminology that's new. When we've been used, I speak for me, I've been used to saints, servants, and then of course the hierarchy within the church, priests, teachers, whatnot, and then, as she mentioned, the great multitude, 144,000 being referenced as servants. It all seems to where we need to try to sort all that out in order to grasp it and hold on to it in our minds.
Yeah, there are a number of elements in relation to this. Doug wrote a study called Ministers. I think it's on the old website. Yeah, it is on the old website. And he talks about some of the ways in which the church order or church organization has been misunderstood. Also in Doug's booklet called God Ordains Women, he showed how, he showed some more details as to how church order, church organization, and structure has been misunderstood. So there's a few things that I want to mention. One thing is that in the New Testament, every member of the church, and again, the word church, or the word translated as church from the New Testament, just refers to the congregation or the assembly of believers, basically the people, the group of people. When it talks about the church in the New Testament, it's actually broader than just the church on earth. It's referring to all the beings in the whole universe of God who are united to God. But just in regard to how things operate on earth, we're used to reading in the New Testament different words, different titles that are used to refer to different positions in the church, so to speak. And even the language that I'm using right now can have a tendency to misrepresent the reality of it, because it's not arbitrary titles with arbitrary positions. These are words that actually mean something. So we read in the New Testament of deacons and bishops and elders and all these other things. Interestingly, pastors isn't really in the New Testament, kind of like a position or a role similar to bishops and deacons or something like that. It's a talent within the church. But here's the thing. In the New Testament, everyone who is part of the church is called a deacon. Now, if we were to just translate the New Testament and to try and translate it as accurately as possible, we probably wouldn't use the word deacon, because it's not a translation. That's a transliteration. Diakonos is the Greek word from which deacon is transliterated. So it's just an anglicized form of the pronunciation of a Greek word. The word simply means servant. And every believer, period, whether on earth or in heaven, every member of the church is called a servant, a quote-unquote deacon. Deacon is not a particular order, a low class of clergy or a high class of laymen within the church as far as the New Testament is concerned. And that's quite significant to understand. Bishops, the word bishop it simply means overseer, someone who oversees the work of the church. In other words, someone who has been appointed in a particular location to act in a role of guiding and watching out to make sure things are going right, according to the principles of truth and all these things, and, to stand as a watchman and all those different things. That's part of overseeing. That's all bishop means. It's not, in the New Testament, it's not a kind of like, something you would go to school to become a bishop, that type of thing. Overseers were appointed by the apostles, but it wasn't kind of the sort of thing within the church that, again, was kind of how it's done today, whether in the Catholic Church or in other Orthodox churches and so on. Yeah.
Am I hearing you say basically it's not a rank, it's a function?
Well, it depends on how you use the words rank and function.
Okay.
But one of the things that has perverted all of these different words and how they're used and how they are carried out within the church has been to kind of separate the idea of function and rank. So, for instance, today someone could be a pastor within a church just because they went to school and got a degree that, hey, now they're called a pastor, whether they are acting pastorally or not, whether they are actually being a shepherd of the people or not. People will call them pastor no matter what because they went to school and became a pastor. In the New Testament, all these terms are primarily functional. Someone is an elder because they are an older person in the church. Someone is a deacon if they are a servant. And all of us are to be servants. Someone is an overseer if they oversee. You know, it's a functional thing. It's not a status to obtain or a position to hold that is granted and held simply because it has been granted. No, it's a functional role that someone has been placed in, and so long as they continue in that functional role, then they can be rightfully referred to by use of that particular word. But it's important to recognize that things have been changed over the centuries quite a bit. And the way that we typically think of things in a church, like, okay, well, you know, you have pastors, and pastors are really at the head of any local congregation, and then you have, you know, elders, and then below elders you have deacons who are, you know, basically maybe one of their primary roles is to collect tithe and different things like that. That is really not the scriptural order. Again, pastors, apostles, prophets, healers, you know, whatever, all these different gifts those are all different gifts that people have. Every member of the church is a deacon. They're part of the ministry, the diaconia, and they all have different gifts. And depending on those different gifts and how they put those gifts to use, that will determine kind of their place within the body and how they function. And then within that, you'll have, okay, everyone's a deacon. Some people will be overseers of the work. But an overseer, or a quote-unquote bishop, may have a talent as being a pastor and also perhaps as something else, you know. So these aren't all separate, distinct things that are kind of separate positions that create, you know, one always above another and so on. But there is certainly a structure to it, and it's a very practical structure. Now, interestingly, the community rule actually uses, and not just the community rule, but in the Dead Sea Scrolls, there are terms that are used. Like, for instance, the idea of bishops or overseers, there are words used in the Dead Sea Scrolls that refer to a quote-unquote position or role within the community that is the Hebrew word that is equivalent to the Greek word in the New Testament that refers to overseers or bishops. So in other words, the Dead Sea Scrolls actually have that same structure where there are quote-unquote bishops or overseers and function in a similar way as to what you find in the New Testament. Likewise, in the Dead Sea Scrolls and even in the Community Rule, which we'll see as we continue to study it, it talks about elders in the same sort of way that you read in the New Testament. And so it's a functional role within the community, and you find that same thing in the New Testament. So all of that, yes, what Gary was just saying about how we need to understand all these different positions and all these different terms and how that will help us. And absolutely, we do need to understand all these different things. And because of that need, I wanted to mention a few things about it so that we don't just view it as it's traditionally practiced in whether it's the Adventist Church or the Catholic Church or any other church, because the way it's practiced in the various churches is not the way it is in the New Testament. And the New Testament, the way that it has it, is actually a lot more similar to what we read in the Dead Sea Scrolls. So those are some elements. And then another thing I wanted to mention is about the different sections of the harvest. It's true that there are different sections of the harvest, and primarily that identifies different groups of people who are brought into the kingdom of God from different backgrounds and at different times. That is somewhat different than the organizational structure within the kingdom. So, for instance, it may very well be that even before the 144,000 are sealed, we are organizing into groups of 1000's, 100's, 50's, and 10's. And then that would carry on, and so you'd have every member of the 144,000 being somewhere in a group of 10, which would be within a group of 50, which would be within a group of 100, which would be within a group of 1,000. But also, as the great multitude is being gathered, and every individual within the great multitude would also be part of a group of 10, which would be a subgroup within a group of 50, which would be a subgroup within a group of 100, which would be a subgroup within a group of 1,000. And so it's it's not like you have 10's, 50's, 100's, and 1000's, and someone is part of a group of 10, but they're not part of a group of 1,000. It's kind of subcategories, and everyone, even the way that it's put later in the community rule, it assumes that priests are actually part of groups of 10's and so on. So you see there's distinction between them, but everyone finds their place within these various groupings. So what that shows is that, again, everyone, regardless of which part of the harvest they happen to belong to and at which time they come into the community, they are placed in the community within this sort of structure. So,
what about the people that are over those groups?
Right, okay. So you have captains over this many, captains over that many. And there was a time recently where Teresa and I actually drew this out as well. And here's the thing. There's two ways to understand it, really. Let's say you just have a chief over 10 or a ruler over 10. Is it that you have one person and then you have 10 beneath them? Or is that they are one of the group of 10 and they are the leader of that 10? So there's 9 others besides themselves. Those are two possible ways to understand that circumstance. If you chart out the scenario, kind of like is flow chart the right? Yeah, a flow chart. You have, let's just say on the bottom, all these groups of 10's. Well, if you have groups of 10s, and each one of those groups of 10s has a leader over them, then together you don't have 5 of those groups equaling 50. You have 5 of those groups equaling 55, because you have each group of 10 plus one more. Mm-hmm. So where do those fit in? So if you have these groups of 50s and those are divided into 10s, then the person who is a leader of a 10 would be essentially part of their individual group of 10. Just like it was actually in the book of Enoch, where you have 200 angels, and it lists 20 of them. And those 20 were the leaders of 10s. So that's kind of the way that it is in the book of Enoch. So that kind of continues on as you keep on going up the flow chart, so to speak, from the 10s to the 50s to the 100s to the 1000's.
I will say this, having that type of structure will really help in, well, obviously keeping things orderly, but my thought was in regard to making the burden manageable upon all, because, you know, you've got a person basically who has, instead of meeting or whatever, you know, you can think of it this way, instead of meeting with 500 different people all the time, it's able to meet with maybe 50 or 10 other people, and then those 10 other people would have, you know, whatever level you're at, then they would have, say, 9 other people that they're dealing with. And then at some point you're not going to have any further to go, any smaller division to go to, but point being that it is such a wise system, because for everyone, for there to be, like with Moses, right, when his father-in-law Jethro saw Moses sitting and judging all the people, in other words, he was, everyone was coming to him with their issues, their disputes or their dealings, and needing someone to judge the matter. He was trying to do it for everyone, and Jethro's like, you're never going to be able to do this. You're going to burn yourself out. You need to set up people that are doing this for you, that report to you. And it's the same idea where rather than everybody going to one person all the time, and that one person supposed to be able to keep up with it all, there's the division and the grouping.
So let's say everyone is part of a group of 10. Well, if there's an issue that comes up, well, they can first deal with it within their group of 10. And if there is an issue beyond what the leader of the group of 10 can resolve, then they could talk to their leader over their, their 50, their group of 50, or they could get together with their other leaders over 10s within that group of 50, and then discuss those things, or whatever. If there's I'm just thinking judicially, if there's a case that cannot be decided, let's say, and then it could keep on going up, and that's the way it worked with Moses, where the cases which could not be decided by the various people under him were brought to him, but they would deal with everything that could be dealt with. Mm-hmm. So, yeah, certainly it's a very, very practical system.
So, yet again, just another example in the community rule of something with which we should have no issue, or one with which I have no issue.
Yeah, I was thinking, Ed was asking, or he was wondering last night how, for the Passover, how the Heavenly Family communicated, the Passover and the instructions for taking the lamb on the 10th day so quickly to millions of people, and I think of, like, in Michigan, there's snow days, and when there's a snow day, there was like a fan-out phone list, which is exactly the same system where, one person would call, there are 10 people who call 10 people who call 10 people, and on it goes until everyone could know before school started that school was canceled, but it's just a quick way also to get out information as well.
Absolutely. I've thought of this in terms of sending out daily texts even. We can only fit so many people on a text group. And so, we're thinking, okay, well, as things progress and there are more and more people part of this, we can't have 100 different text groups and then have to individually send the text 100 different times. It doesn't work. Right now we have to send the text 3 times because there's enough people that we have to have them in 3 different groups. And so, we're just thinking, well, you know what? It makes a lot of sense to have, like, let's say there was groups of 10's, that all of us were divided into groups of 10's, and there was individuals who were the leaders of those groups of 10's. Well, then it would be a good thing for example, for a leader of a group of 10 to send a message during the dailies to their group of 10. And perhaps that leader would have gotten it from ultimately going back to a leader of 1,000 or whatever, or from the master of the community or whatever. Or it might be that they would have something more customized to their particular group of 10. But something like that, it seems like a wise system that kind of divides up the responsibility and the burden. And not only that, but it makes things more customized to the needs of the particular smaller groups.
If you think about it too, if this fan-out system that's in the community rule here, everyone really is part of a group of 10. Like the master would probably have 10 people that would fan out to 10 and would go to 1000's, but it's really hard for one person to deal with more than 10 people. It's just really hard to be intimate. And I just remember that from just other small groups I've been a part of that, I know we're not supposed to go to the secular world for this kind of information, but it is kind of biblical that, you get a group of 8 or 10, and it's just really hard to handle more than that as a person.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. But then everyone in the whole fan-out would have 10. I mean, even the master would have 10,
Absolutely, yeah. So, like, for instance, like you're saying, everyone would ultimately be a part of a group of 10. So you'd have someone, and let's say there's a leader in a group of 10. Well, you have those groups of 10's, you have 5 of them, and that forms a group of 50. And someone from among that 50, which is also someone from among one of those groups of 10's, is going to be the leader of that 50. So let's say that it's one of the leaders of 10's would also be a leader of that 50. Well, then you have 2 groups of 50's, and out of those 2 leaders of those groups of 50's, one of them, let's say, is also a leader of a group of 100. Well, then you have 10 groups of 100, and one of those 10 leaders of those groups of 100 would then be the leader of that group of 1,000. So, you can just keep on going like that, and then ultimately, let's say you have 10 groups of 1,000, and then you have the instructor, and some information needs to be passed along to everyone real quick. Well, the instructor only has to tell those 10 groups or those 10 leaders of 1,000, then they pass it on to the respective leaders who pass it on to the leaders going down the line. So yeah, it's quite an effective and efficient system. And again, even without the community rule, I mean, it looks like that's the scriptural system that we are supposed to follow. Certainly, though, the community rule, again, it just highlights it and brings it to the forefront. So yeah, any other comments or questions on this? Okay. Well, we have been on for quite some time, and, most, if not all of us, are a little bit extra tired tonight from last night. And, hey, we have more studies before us throughout this week, continuing on the same topic. So we aren't going to miss our opportunity by bringing the meeting to a close. So would anyone like to volunteer to close with prayer?
I'll pray.
Wonderful.
Heavenly family, I thank you so much for each person here on the call. I thank you for the friendships and the bonds that are being made throughout the continent. And we just love you. We all love you so very much. And we're so thankful for your wisdom and your guidance and your direction and your teaching. We thank you for Trent and Teresa. And I pray for safe travels for Walter and Michael and Anna and their families, their children, your hand of blessing upon all of them. And again, I just praise you and worship you and give you thanks and glory and honor. Please continue to teach us, hold us close, keep us in the palm of your hand, and protect us from harm and evil. We ask these things in the name of the branch he and she, we pray. Amen.
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 Toda. Thank you.
Amen. Good night. Thank you.
Good night.
Good night. Good night, everyone.
We'll see you all tomorrow.
Bye. Good
Love
night.
you all. Have a good rest.
You too.
Good night.
Good night.